Hey everyone, today I want to go ahead and show you guys how to do curved paper piecing. And this will allow us to add our accent strips, which end up being our basket handles, on our B units. This same technique is going to apply to several of the B units. I happen to be using the B2L unit right now as my example. So you will have a stack of B2L units, and you'll also have the fabrics that go with them. The first one is our section 1 template B21, which is this piece, and then also our accent strip, which is section 2, and that's template BL1. Now notice, just like normal, these are mirror images of each other right now, because typically when we're placing fabric, we would place it from the back. Remember that the back side of the unit paper is the front side of your fabric. So I'm going to place some glue here and then take my section 1 fabric and place it right side. This shows leaving some space here, but I actually am going to go ahead and put this right along the edge. In fact, I'm actually going to turn this over so I can see it a little better. And I'm just going to put this along the edge and then basically center it top to bottom with my fabric. Now notice that we're really close here on this dashed line and the dashed line here, but on the actual template, see how this is blunted, so don't worry about it. You're not going to run out of room if you just center it. Once you've done this, there are two things that you need to do at your sewing machine. The first is you want to sew your TRP lines just like I've shown you in the past. Remember to set your stitch length at a basting stitch, which is around 2.8 to 3. And then the second thing that you're going to do is you're going to use that same basting stitch and actually stitch along this basting stitch line 1. So I'm going to do both of those things and then come back to you and show you the result. Alright, so as I said, I went to the machine and I sewed TRP lines here and here. I've trimmed those up on the front and the back, and then I also sewed a basting stitch all along this basting stitch line 1. Both of those done at about a 2.8 to 3.0 on my machine. I'm going to be showing you two different methods of doing this curve piecing today, and here's where the two methods start to differ. So let me show you what to do next. So we have basically sewn this basting line in place of doing our typical fold step. We can't fold a curve and use our template plastic to fold along that. So we basted the curve instead, and now we're up to the trim step. So our trimming also can't be done with just a simple ruler because it's a curve. So you can trim the excess fabric in one of three ways, just like any curves. What we're going to do is fold this back. So this is kind of a fold step, but it's a curved fold step, so you're going to get some ruffles. And you can trim this up using your rotary cutter, either freehand or with a ruler, or I'm just going to play it safe and use scissors here. And what you're wanting to do is trim as close as you can to this paper, but without actually trimming the paper and without trimming the basting stitch. You may find that it's easier to do that from the other side where you can actually see the basting stitch, but just make sure that you've got that paper pulled back really good. So we're going to just go along here and just right to the outside of the basting stitch is where you want to do this, as close as you can. And again, anything that's left is just a little extra seam allowance, but you don't want extra bulk if you can help it. So again, I'm holding the paper back. I can feel it underneath. If you want to, you can trim from this side so that you can see the paper. So whichever is more comfortable for you. You do what you feel is best for you. But you can trim from either side. And that's our trim step. Our next step is our glue step, and so we need to glue this section onto this section. The very first thing you need to do is make sure that you have sewn your TRP lines, like we talked about in class last time, on this section. Once you've done that, and only once you've done that, what you should do is go ahead and tear this paper off. You may want to kind of fold at the TRP lines just a little bit, just to make sure there's a good crease so that you can get that paper off easily without accidentally ripping out your basting stitches, because you need those. All right, so I can see my basting stitches here and here, and these are going to line up with the basting stitches here and here. So let me show you how this works. I'm going to take this like this, and we know that we want to do right sides together, and so I'm going to line up this TRP line on my bottom fabric and this TRP line on my top fabric, and I'm just going to glue that in place. Now what you may want to do is just come like just to either side and glue, rather than gluing across the seam, because if you glue across the seam, that'll make it more difficult to pull the TRP lines out, the basting stitches at the end. And so what I'm doing is I'm just gluing this right up against the basting stitch that I sewed, the curved basting stitch. So just butting it right up against that. That's going to give me my 1/4 inch seam. Now I come to the next TRP line, and I'm not just lining up the very top, I'm kind of lining up along the entire line. I want to make sure that those are aligned. Again, a little glue each side of the basting, and put that right up against that curved line. Okay. Next, you can pull this over and start gluing towards the edge. So I'm going to put just a line of glue right along that basting stitch and go ahead and align this. Kind of using my fingernail. You could probably use your purple thing if you wanted to. And this is going to stick out a little bit. If you remember what our paper looked like before we pulled it off, there was some extra here on both ends, so it is going to stick out a little bit. Don't worry about that. It's not a perfect fit. Can do the same thing on the other side. And I'm just butting right up against that stitching that I did previously. Give that a nice good rub, make sure it's nice and stuck. And then the center can also be glued. It is pretty much in place by itself. Okay, if you want to at this point, if you feel like this is not laying down really nice for you, you could go in and take your iron and just press right along this seam, kind of where you've glued it, and just make sure that it's nice and stuck down and flat. There are two options when it comes to actually sewing this. You can sew it like a traditional curved piecing, and if you're going to do that, what you would do is you would come in and do a 1/4 inch seam allowance from this edge where your basting line is and your stitching is aligned with your fabric, and just come in a 1/4 inch and sew all along here. However, we do have paper on this other side and this nice stitching line too. So you could instead, this is a little backwards from how you normally do curved piecing. Usually the concave piece, the fluffy piece, is on top. But you could go ahead and go in and stitch along this line. Now you run the risk of creating little pleats in your fabric because you can't really see what's going on underneath here. However, there is a way to at least minimize that risk, and the way to do that is as you're stitching, hold this top fabric up off of your table. Don't push it all flat like this. Let it kind of hold up, and use this hand to hold it up just a little bit, and that will allow the fabric down below to hopefully just ease in and not create pleats. All right, here I am at my machine, and I've got my stitch length set to my typical 1.8 for paper piecing, and I'm going to start about 1/8 of an inch from my solid line here, just like I normally do. And I'm just going to take it slow and go around this curve, sewing right on the line and remembering I'm holding this part up so that we hopefully won't get any pleats. Occasionally I'm stopping to just turn things and adjust to make sure I'm on track if I feel I need to. And when I get to the end, I'll also sew beyond the line by about 1/8 of an inch or so. 2 or 3 stitches is plenty. There we go. All right, now that I've got it sewn and got it unclipped from my machine, I am looking at this from the back side, and right here I've got a potential little pleat, but I'm thinking that that might actually just iron out. It may not actually be in the seam allowance, so we're going to see what happens once I iron it. I will use my pressing pen, my Acorn starch pen, and see how it comes out, and I'll be right back. All right, the potential pleat was right in here, and I can't even tell where it was at this point. It did press out, so it didn't actually cause me any issues. If it had still been a pleat there, I would have gone ahead and taken the stitching out, probably starting at the beginning and going about 1/2 inch past where the pleat was, iron it out real good, and then restitched that little part from 1/2 inch beyond all the way to the end. If the pleat had been somewhere here in the middle, I would have just gone about 1/2 an inch on either side to take care of that. Once your unit is stitched to your satisfaction, you've gotten rid of any little pleats or anything that you need to get rid of, you're ready to go ahead and trim this just like we have in the past. One thing I want to point out, as we get further into the process of this quilt and we start doing some of our assembly, I will tell you that once you've used TRP lines and that stitching, that you should go ahead and take those lines out. However, in this case, I wanted to show you, we've used this intersection right here. We have this line that extends all the way out here, and at another point in our assembly process, that line is actually going to line up with other lines. So these are our B2L units right here, and those are going to match up with some other lines. So please do not remove your basting stitches on your TRPs just yet. We'll do that at a later time.